It started to rely too much on reports from regional managers. Neat charts, polished PowerPoints, carefully worded updates. All of it looked good on paper. But paper didn't cry. Paper didn't tell you the truth about how people were being treated when no cameras were around. And within 10 minutes of stepping inside, Roland saw something that stopped him cold. Near the back hallway, beside the employee restroom doors, a young woman in a faded gray uniform was hunched over a mop bucket. Her shoulders trembled. At first, Roland thought maybe she was just tired, but when she turned slightly, he caught sight of tears running down her cheeks. She quickly wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, trying to make it look like nothing was wrong. Roland slowed his pace. Customers passed by without a second glance. Nobody cared enough to notice, but something about her made him stop. She looked far too young to be carrying whatever weight was pulling her down. "Hey," Roland said softly, careful not to startle her. "You all right?" The young woman straightened up quickly, nearly dropping the mop. Her pale face flushed red. "I'm fine, just allergies," she mumbled, looking away. "Allergies don't usually make someone cry like that," Roland replied gently. His voice carried no authority, no hint of who he really was, just concern. She gripped the mop tighter. "Seriously, I'm okay." Roland studied her for a moment. Early 20s, maybe 22 at most. Her name tag read Hannah Kettering. He noticed her hands, calloused in a way that didn't match her age, the kind of wear that comes from long hours of physical work. "You don't look okay," he said. "I don't mean to pry, just if something's wrong, maybe talking about it helps." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She hesitated, like she was weighing the risk of saying anything at all. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. "Doesn't matter, nobody listens here." "Maybe I will," Roland said. The words hung between them. For a moment, Hannah searched his face, as though trying to figure out whether she could trust this stranger with the truth. Roland gave her a small nod, encouraging but not pushing. Hannah's voice was barely above a whisper when she finally spoke. "They make fun of me. The supervisors. They mock the way I talk. Say I sound stupid. They cut my hours whenever they feel like it. And last week one of them told me if I complained, I'd be out the door before I knew it." Her eyes darted toward the break room, as though someone might walk out and overhear. Roland felt his stomach tighten. He had expected maybe personal stress, maybe money trouble or family drama, but this, abuse coming from his own managers, hit a different nerve. "Who's they?" he asked quietly. "Mr. Chandler and Miss Foley," she whispered. "They run the floor. Everyone's scared of them. If you're on their bad side, you get the worst shifts, fewer hours, or you're gone." Roland listened carefully, masking the storm that was building inside him. He'd hired both of those supervisors years ago through recommendations. On paper, they were efficient, numbers always hit. But Hannah's words painted a picture he hadn't imagined. "I'm sorry you've had to deal with that," Roland said after a moment. Her eyes filled again. "Sorry doesn't change anything. I can't afford to lose this job. Rent's already past due. And if I try to speak up, they'll twist it around. They always do." Roland wanted to tell her right there and then who he was, to promise her those supervisors wouldn't hurt her again, but he knew he couldn't reveal himself yet. If he did, they'd clean up their act instantly, and he'd never see the real truth of how they treated people. Instead, he placed a steady hand on the mop handle, just for a second. "You don't deserve that, and you're not as invisible as you think." Hannah blinked, confused by the kindness from a stranger. But Roland knew this was only the beginning, because if Hannah was telling the truth, and he believed she was, then the rot inside his company was worse than he ever imagined. But Roland had to be sure, and to be sure, he'd need to keep his disguise a little longer. Roland lingered near the back hallway, pretending to check his phone as Hannah bent over her mop again. He didn't want her to feel cornered, but he also knew if he walked away now, she'd sink back into silence and nothing would change. He shifted his weight, leaned casually against the wall. "So, Hannah, how long have you been working here?" Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "How do you—" She stopped, realizing he must have read her name tag. A few months. Why? Just wondering, Roland said, smiling lightly. You seem like you take the job seriously. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Doesn't matter. They don't care. Who's they again? She hesitated, lowering her voice. Mr. Chandler, Miss Foley, they act like they run the place. Roland kept his tone calm. And the rest of the team? Do they see what's going on? They see, Hannah replied quickly. But nobody says anything. Everyone needs the job. We all keep our heads down. She glanced nervously toward the employee entrance, as if expecting one of the supervisors to barge through. Roland leaned closer, voice low. Can I tell you something? Sometimes it only takes one person being brave for others to follow. Doesn't feel that way when you're the one carrying the weight. But it's true. Hannah shook her head. Brave doesn't pay the rent. Brave doesn't put food in the fridge. Brave gets you fired. Her words stung him. He knew they were honest, born out of experience, not cynicism. He studied her face, the way her cheeks flushed when she spoke about survival. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't dramatic. She was trapped. Can I ask you something else? Roland said, softer now. She glanced at him, wary. What? What keeps you here? If it's this bad, why not find something else? Her answer was immediate. Because this is all I've got. I applied everywhere. Fast food, gas stations, even call centers. No one's hiring. Or if they are, it's part-time, minimum hours. Here at least, I thought I'd get steady work. Turns out steady means begging for extra shifts while they laugh at me. Roland clenched his jaw, careful not to let the anger show. He had built Travell Market with the promise that his stores would provide stability for people who needed it most. And yet, right here in front of him, was living proof that his promise had been broken. You deserve better, he said simply. Hannah let out another laugh, but this time it cracked halfway through, closer to a sob. Everybody says that. Nobody means it. I mean it, Roland replied firmly. For the first time, she really looked at him. Her gaze lingered as though searching his eyes for something solid. Whatever she saw there made her shoulders sag with a mix of exhaustion and relief. You don't even know me, she whispered. Maybe not, Roland said, but I know what unfair looks like, and I know what fear sounds like. You shouldn't have to carry that at 22. She turned back to her mop, wiping the handle with shaky fingers. It's not just me. They do it to others too. Juan in stockroom, Lacey at checkout. They all get it. I don't know, maybe I cry more than they do. Roland stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. Does anyone higher up know? District manager? HR? Hannah shook her head quickly. Are you kidding? If it gets back to Chandler or Foley, I'm done. They'd fire me for being disruptive. They've done it before. Roland's gut twisted again. Fired for speaking up. Fired for being honest. The very culture he had promised to fight against when he started this company was thriving in his own house. You're stronger than you think, Roland said quietly. Even talking to me right now, that takes guts. Hannah gave him a tired look. Doesn't feel like it. Courage never feels like courage in the moment, he answered. There was a pause. The hallway buzzed with the hum of a cooler in the stockroom, carts rolling somewhere in the distance, voices calling from checkout lanes. But here, between Roland and Hannah, the world felt smaller, more fragile. Finally, Hannah asked, Why do you even care? You're just some customer. Most people don't even see me. Roland smiled faintly. Maybe I've been where you are. Maybe I remember what it's like to feel invisible. And maybe I don't want to let someone stay invisible when I can help. Her eyes softened, but suspicion lingered. You sound like you're not just passing through. Roland chuckled under his breath. Let's just say I like to keep my eyes open. She shook her head, unable to piece him together. Well, thanks, I guess, for asking. Don't thank me yet, Roland said, stepping back. Sometimes the truth is harder to face than the silence. Hannah frowned, puzzled, but Roland gave no more explanation. He knew he had to see Chandler and Foley with his own eyes. Her words painted a grim picture, but he needed evidence. He needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. But if Hannah was right, then this was only scratching the surface. And Roland was about to dig much deeper. Roland spent the next 30 minutes drifting through the aisles like any other shopper, but his mind was locked on Hannah's words. Every display, every neatly stacked shelf reminded him of the promises he'd once made. That Travell Market wouldn't just be another faceless chain. It was supposed to be different. It was supposed to mean something. And yet, here he was, learning the truth, not from a report or a meeting, but from a janitor fighting back tears over her mop bucket. He stopped near the dairy section, watching as employees moved with mechanical efficiency. Some looked tired, others carried the expression of people who had learned not to stand out too much. Hannah had mentioned two names, Chandler and Foley. Supervisors with power, supervisors who apparently abused it. Roland wanted to see them for himself. It didn't take long. At the front of the store, by the registers, a tall man in a stiff shirt barked orders at a cashier. His voice carried sharp edges, loud enough for customers to hear. "I told you twice already, scan faster, we don't have time for your mistakes." The young cashier's face turned red as she fumbled with the items. Roland caught the name tag, Lacey Morris. She was barely more than a teenager. The man loomed over her, his expression stone cold. That had to be Mr. Chandler. Beside him, a woman with clipped blonde hair and a clipboard stood watching, lips pursed in amusement. She whispered something into Chandler's ear, and the two exchanged a smug glance. That would be Ms. Foley. Roland's hands curled into fists inside his hoodie pocket. Hannah hadn't exaggerated. These two carried themselves like royalty over peasants, their authority feeding off humiliation. He moved closer, picking up a basket so he'd look natural. As he pretended to browse candy near the registers, he overheard Foley's voice. "Honestly, Lacey, if you can't handle a basic shift, maybe this job isn't for you," Foley said with mock sweetness. "Plenty of people out there would kill for these hours." Lacey kept her head down, nodding quickly, though her eyes glistened with tears. Roland could feel his chest tighten. He wanted to step in right there, but he reminded himself, not yet. He had to stay undercover long enough to see the full picture. He turned down the cleaning aisle, and as he walked, he spotted Hannah again. She was crouched low, scrubbing at a stubborn stain near the end cap. She looked up just long enough to catch Roland's eye. For a brief second, there was recognition. The kind of look that says, "You heard me. You believe me." Roland crouched beside her under the pretense of checking detergent. He kept his voice low. "I saw them. Chandler and Foley. You weren't lying." Her lips pressed into a tight line. "Told you. And it's worse when customers aren't around. You got lucky seeing that much." He tilted his head. "What happens then?" Hannah's hand slowed on the sponge. She seemed to wrestle with herself before answering. "They humiliate people. Make jokes in the back room. Call Juan slowpoke because English isn't his first language. Tell Lacey she's too dumb to count change. They like it when people feel small. Makes them feel big." Roland felt a surge of disgust. "And nobody reports this?" Her laugh was short and bitter. "Report it to who? The district manager only cares about numbers. As long as sales are up, Chandler and Foley look like stars. And HR? They're miles away. They don't step foot in the store unless it's some corporate event. It's their word against ours." Roland absorbed every word. He thought of the quarterly meetings where Chandler and Foley's names were often praised for efficiency. He thought of how proud he had been to see charts rising, sales climbing. And now he realized those numbers had been built on the backs of silenced workers. "Does anyone ever push back?" Roland asked. Hannah shook her head. "The last guy who tried, his name was Brandon. Stockroom. He spoke up after Chandler called him lazy in front of everyone. A week later, they cut his hours down to almost nothing. He quit. No one's seen him since." Roland stayed crouched, staring at the row of bleach bottles while rage built in his chest. He had built Travell Market to give people opportunities, not to crush them under intimidation. He turned his eyes to Hannah again. "Why didn't you quit?" Her voice cracked. Because I can't. My mom's sick. Hospital bills keep piling up. If I walk out, we lose the apartment. She loses her medicine. I'd rather take their abuse than risk that. Her honesty hit him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just working for herself. She was carrying her family's survival on her shoulders. Roland lowered his voice to almost a whisper. No one should have to choose between survival and dignity. Hannah's hands trembled as she shoved the sponge back into the bucket. That's life when you don't matter. Roland swallowed hard. He wanted to tell her she did matter, that her voice mattered, but right now she didn't need promises. She needed action. I hear you, he said firmly, more than you realize. Her brow furrowed, but before she could respond, Chandler's voice boomed from the front of the store. Kettering, quit crawling around back there and move to aisle 6. You're slower than molasses. Hannah flinched, snapping upright. She grabbed her bucket quickly and rolled it away without a word. Roland stood frozen for a moment, watching the way she shrank under Chandler's command. Something inside him hardened, but this wasn't the time to reveal who he was. Not yet. First, he needed to confront the rot directly, to see just how deep Chandler and Foley's cruelty ran. Roland's decision was clear. He needed to see Chandler and Foley behind the curtain. Not the version they performed in front of customers, but the raw, unchecked behavior that poisoned the workplace. If Hannah and the others were telling the truth, then he'd catch it where employees felt most vulnerable. The back rooms, the stock floor, and the break area. He eased his way toward the employee corridor, keeping his head down, basket in hand, as though he was lost looking for paper towels. Near the swinging doors marked employees only, a young stock clerk pushed through with a dolly stacked with cereal boxes. The door stayed open just long enough for Roland to slip behind him, unnoticed. Inside, the fluorescent lights cast a harsher glow. The air smelled of cardboard, dust, and cleaning chemicals. The atmosphere felt different here, less polished, less staged. Roland slowed his pace, pretending to scroll on his phone as voices rose from the break room ahead. Through the cracked door, he saw them. Chandler leaned back in a plastic chair, legs spread wide, sipping coffee. Foley perched beside him, clipboard balanced on her knees. 2 other employees sat stiffly on the far side of the table, trying to look invisible. Numbers look good this week, Chandler boomed, tapping the table. Corporate'll eat this up. Foley smirked. Yeah, and if anyone asks, we'll say morale's high. They don't need to know how much babysitting these idiots require. Chandler chuckled. Kettering especially. Can you believe she cried over her schedule? Pathetic. Some people aren't cut out for real work. Roland's jaw tightened, his hands curling in his hoodie pocket. He forced himself to stay still, every muscle fighting the urge to storm in. One of the employees at the table, a young man with a stock badge that read Juan Alvarez, shifted uncomfortably. She works hard, he said cautiously. Chandler shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel. Excuse me? Juan quickly shook his head. Nothing, sir. Thought so, Chandler sneered. Next time you feel like defending her, remember I control your schedule too. The silence that followed was heavy. Foley leaned closer to Chandler, whispering something that made him laugh. The cruelty in their tone was unmistakable, not just authority, but enjoyment in their power. Roland couldn't watch anymore. He backed away from the door, chest tight. Hannah hadn't exaggerated. In fact, she had downplayed it. This was targeted humiliation, dressed up as management. He wandered down the stockroom aisles, trying to process what he had just witnessed. Stacks of canned goods surrounded him, boxes piled high. The sound of a pallet jack echoed faintly. A voice behind him startled him. You're not supposed to be back here. Roland turned to see a young man, maybe 19, pushing a cart of bottled water. His name tag read, Evan Pritchard. Yeah, I was just looking for the restroom, Roland said casually. Evan studied him for a second, then shrugged. Careful, Chandler catches you back here, he'll blow a fuse. Roland lowered his voice. He always liked that? Evan's eyes darted toward the break room, then back to Roland. Depends. If you're on his good side, he leaves you alone. If not... He trailed off, lifting a shoulder. Roland gave him a small nod. Appreciate the heads up. Evan hesitated, then leaned closer. You didn't hear it from me, but he plays favorites. Foley too. If they don't like you, they'll cut your hours until you quit. Happened to my cousin last month. Roland's gut twisted again. Every conversation confirmed Hannah's story. The rot wasn't isolated. It was systemic. He thanked Evan and slipped back toward the sales floor. His disguise was holding, but he felt the weight of his double life pressing harder with every step. Out here, he was just a customer with a basket. In truth, he was the owner of every paycheck, every mop bucket, every crushed spirit. Back near aisle 6, Hannah worked quietly, pushing her mop with a rhythm that looked more like survival than cleaning. Roland approached her again, keeping his voice casual. I heard Chandler and Foley, he said under his breath. Hannah's eyes widened. You shouldn't have. If they find out, they won't, Roland cut in firmly, but you were right. About everything. She blinked rapidly, struggling to hold back emotion. So now you know, but it doesn't change anything. Roland looked at her mop, then back at her. It changes everything. Hannah tilted her head, confused. What do you mean? You'll see soon enough, Roland said. He glanced toward the registers where Chandler was scolding another cashier, his voice rising above the sound of beeping scanners. Foley stood beside him, scribbling notes like a queen watching her knight. Roland knew it was time to stop observing. He had seen enough. But exposing them wouldn't just mean confronting Chandler and Foley. It would mean revealing himself and risking the trust of every employee who wondered how he could let this happen under his watch. By the time Roland circled the store again, he knew he couldn't hide behind his hoodie much longer. Chandler and Foley had crossed too many lines, and each passing minute added another layer of proof to the anger brewing inside him. But anger wasn't enough. Not when lives and livelihoods were on the line. He needed to act, and act decisively. He slipped into the restroom, washed his hands slowly, and studied his reflection in the cracked mirror. The disguise was holding, scruffy beard, plain hoodie, nothing to suggest the CEO of Travell Market was staring back. But beneath it, he saw the man who had once promised his late father that he would build a business rooted in respect. He remembered the words his father used to say, "If you can't treat people with dignity, you don't deserve to lead them." Roland took a deep breath and stepped out. At the front registers, Chandler was in full performance again. He leaned over Lacey, his voice sharp enough for nearby customers to hear. "You're holding up the line again. What's wrong with you today? Do you even know how to count change?" The older woman in line shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "That's not right." But Chandler ignored her. Foley stood a few feet away, arms crossed, smirking at the show. That was it. Roland set his basket down and walked straight toward the service counter. A few customers glanced his way, sensing tension in his stride. Employees froze, eyes widening as he stopped just a few feet from Chandler. "Enough," Roland said, his voice carrying weight even without being raised. Chandler spun around, frowning at the stranger daring to interrupt. "Who are you? This is none of your business." Roland met his eyes, calm but unflinching. "It's very much my business." Foley scoffed. "Sir, if you're a customer, I suggest you mind your own shopping and let us handle our employees." Roland reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open and laid his black corporate ID card flat on the counter, the silver logo of Travell Market gleaming under the lights. His name was printed clearly, Roland Travell, Chief Executive Officer. The silence that followed was absolute. Chandler's face drained of color. Foley's clipboard slipped slightly in her grip. Around them, employees stared, mouths slightly open, as realization rippled through the room. Roland let the weight of the moment sink in before speaking again. "I didn't come here for a show. I came here to see the truth, and I've seen more than enough." Hannah, standing frozen by her mop a few aisles over, looked like she'd stopped breathing. Chandler tried to recover, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Travell, sir, I can explain. We were just keeping standards high. Sometimes employees—" "Stop," Roland cut him off. His voice was steady, but steel edged every word. What I heard wasn't leadership. It was bullying. What I saw wasn't discipline. It was humiliation. This isn't how you run a store, and it sure as hell isn't how you treat people. Foley's cheeks flushed crimson. With respect, sir, you're seeing one side. We have to maintain order. If we let them slack, the whole operation... Roland stepped closer, his presence towering now. Order doesn't require cruelty. Discipline doesn't require insults. And leadership doesn't mean crushing the people who work for you. Lacey blinked back tears behind the register. Juan peeked out from the stockroom door. Even Evan, the young clerk, stopped mid-step, gripping his cart as though he couldn't believe what was happening. Roland turned his gaze slowly across the room. How many of you have been treated this way? There was hesitation, fear thick in the air, but then Hannah's voice rang out, trembling but clear. All of us. It was as though a dam broke. Lacey nodded quickly, whispering, "Yes." Juan lifted his hand slightly, eyes down. Evan muttered, "Yeah, more than once." The truth was out, and there was no pulling it back. Roland turned back to Chandler and Foley. You've built your numbers by stepping on the very people who keep this store alive. That ends today. Chandler stammered, "But sir..." "You're done," Roland said firmly. "Both of you. Effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the employees. Chandler's mouth opened, but no words came out. Foley's face twisted with shock, her carefully controlled mask shattering. Roland didn't look away. "Turn in your keys, your badges. Security will escort you out." The tension broke like a snapped wire. Relief washed across the employees' faces, tentative at first, but growing with each second. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what she'd just witnessed. Roland exhaled slowly. For weeks, maybe months, these workers had carried fear on their backs. In a single moment, that weight had been lifted. But Roland knew this was just the beginning. Because firing Chandler and Foley was easy. What came next, rebuilding trust, repairing wounds, and proving to every worker that their voices mattered, would be much harder. The store felt different the moment Chandler and Foley left. Employees stood frozen for a beat, stunned by what had just happened. Then, like air rushing back into a room that had been suffocating, the atmosphere shifted. Shoulders relaxed, eyes lifted. Conversations whispered in fear just minutes ago now bubbled into cautious relief. Roland stayed at the front, watching it all unfold. He knew the decision to fire them on the spot would ripple through every corner of the company. But this wasn't about image or damage control. It was about righting something that should have never been allowed to rot in the first place. He turned to the employees gathered nearby. "I want to be clear. What you've endured here was unacceptable. This company was built on the promise that people matter more than profits, and today I saw that promise broken." His voice dropped lower, steady. "That ends now." Lacey's hands trembled as she clutched her register. Does that mean things will really change?" Roland nodded. "Yes, not overnight, but starting today. No one should fear speaking up. No one should be humiliated for doing their job." He scanned the room, his gaze falling on each face. "If anyone, I mean anyone, treats you the way Chandler and Foley did, I want to know. And I don't care if it's a supervisor, a manager, or someone above them. I will listen." There was a long pause, then Juan spoke quietly. "You really mean that?" Roland looked him straight in the eye. "I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't." Juan lowered his head, a mixture of relief and disbelief crossing his face. Roland took a breath and softened his tone. "But I also know trust isn't given. It's earned. And I have work to do to earn yours again." Behind him, Hannah lingered near her mop bucket, staring as though she still wasn't sure this was real. Roland walked over. "You were brave today," he told her. She shook her head quickly. "I wasn't. I couldn't stay quiet anymore." "That's courage," Roland said firmly. "And it's because you spoke The change is happening right now. Hannah's throat tightened, her eyes welling again. But what if things go back to the way they were? What if someone else comes in and does the same thing? Then you come to me, Roland said without hesitation. Directly. I'll make sure you're heard. She searched his face, testing for cracks in his promise, but found none. Slowly, she nodded. Just then, Evan rolled up with his cart, his voice unsteady. Sir, if you really are who you say you are, can we get more training too? Not just schedules thrown at us? Half the mistakes we make are because no one shows us how to do things right. Roland smiled faintly. That's exactly the kind of feedback I need. Thank you. The employees exchanged looks, their expressions shifting from shock to cautious hope. Roland turned to the assistant manager, a middle-aged woman named Deborah Klein, who had stayed quiet through the entire confrontation. Her face was pale, but her eyes carried no cruelty, only fear of speaking up before. Deborah, Roland said, I need you to step in as acting supervisor until I assign someone permanent. But things will be different under your watch, understood? She swallowed hard, then nodded. Understood, sir. Good. Because leadership isn't about control, Roland said. It's about responsibility. And responsibility means protecting the people who work under you. The words hung heavy in the air. For the first time in a long while, employees stood a little straighter, not from fear, but from possibility. Roland knew this was only one store in many, but he also knew change often begins in small places. What mattered now was follow-through. He couldn't allow what happened here to slip under the radar elsewhere. He pulled his phone from his pocket and typed a quick message to his executive assistant. Schedule an all-hands meeting with district managers. Urgent. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked around one final time. Hannah caught his gaze, and for a brief moment, the weight she carried seemed lighter. Roland felt something shift inside him too. Guilt, yes, but also resolve. He had let distance blind him. He had trusted charts over people, numbers over voices. That ended today. But as the employees slowly returned to their workstations, Roland knew this cleanup was bigger than Chandler and Foley. It was about rewriting the culture of an entire company, and that responsibility rested squarely on his shoulders. The store eventually returned to motion. Carts rolled, scanners beeped, and customers went about their shopping. But beneath the familiar sounds, there was a different current now. Employees who had walked on eggshells for months suddenly stood taller. Their voices carried more freely. The oppressive weight that Chandler and Foley had held over them was gone. Roland lingered near the front, leaning against the service desk as he watched the change unfold. A mother with two small kids smiled at Lacey as she checked out their groceries. Juan stacked canned vegetables in the middle aisle with more care than before, no longer flinching at every footstep behind him. Even Hannah, pushing her mop near the dairy section, carried herself differently. She wasn't just cleaning a floor anymore. She was proof that someone finally listened. When the rush died down, Roland gathered the employees at the front of the store. Not a formal meeting, just a circle of tired workers standing among registers and carts. I won't keep you long, Roland said, his voice carrying across the group. But I want to leave you with this. Today wasn't just about removing two bad supervisors. It was about showing that this company stands for more than profits or numbers on a chart. It's about people. About you. Hannah stood toward the back, wringing her hands nervously. Roland noticed and addressed her directly. Hannah reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That when leaders stop listening, the people doing the hardest work pay the highest price. That ends here. And it ends now. Her cheeks flushed, and she lowered her eyes, but a faint smile tugged at her lips. Roland turned back to the group. I know words alone won't fix what's been broken, so here's what's going to happen. There will be an anonymous hotline for reporting mistreatment. Every store will have surprise audits, not for sales numbers, but for workplace culture. And any manager who thinks intimidation is leadership will not last here, period. Evan, still gripping his cart, looked around at his coworkers and whispered, He's serious. Roland caught the comment and smiled faintly. Yes, I'm serious. Because I don't want Travell Market to just be where people shop. I want it to be where people work with dignity. That's what we're going to build together. There was silence for a moment, then scattered nods. The atmosphere wasn't celebratory, not yet, but it carried a new energy, something closer to cautious hope. Roland excused the employees back to their stations. As they drifted away, Hannah stayed behind. She approached slowly, mop bucket rolling at her side. "Can I say something?" she asked softly. "Of course," Roland said. "I thought—" She hesitated, biting her lip. "I thought no one would ever notice. That people like me just didn't matter." Her voice cracked. "But you noticed." Roland's expression softened. "You mattered long before I walked in. Don't ever forget that. Sometimes it takes someone speaking the truth for the rest of us to wake up." She blinked hard, tears threatening again. "Thank you." He placed a hand gently on the mop handle. "Thank you, Hannah, for reminding me what leadership really means." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that doesn't need filling. Then Hannah gave a small nod and returned to her work, shoulders straighter than when he first saw her. As Roland left the store, sunlight washed over the parking lot. He paused by his car, glancing back at the Travell Market sign. The business he had built was still standing, but now he knew it wasn't just about buildings or brands. It was about the people inside, the lives tied to every paycheck and schedule. He thought of his father's words again. If you can't treat people with dignity, you don't deserve to lead them. That truth had never been clearer. Roland started the engine, determination firm in his chest. Change wouldn't be easy. It would take months, maybe years, to rebuild the culture across every store. But today proved one thing. It was possible, and it was worth it. Because behind every chart, behind every profit margin, there were people like Hannah, and people always came first. This story reminds us of something simple yet powerful. Leadership isn't about authority, it's about accountability. It's about standing up when others stay quiet. It's about remembering that even the smallest voice can change everything. If you believe more people need to hear stories like this, make sure to subscribe and share, because the truth only matters if it's told.